want to ask you all to get a little nerdy with me, right? And to provide some definition for us and anyone who's watching. Oftentimes I hear people talk about, or we talk about trauma being passed down, right? And I think it's perceived as trauma is passed down in the same way like hair or eye color is passed down. We also hear people talk about intergenerational trauma and generational trauma. I'm using them interchangeably. So can you clarify, like, what is intergenerational trauma? What is generational trauma? And how do we actually pass down trauma to our children, to other generations?
I love this question. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I think about generational trauma as what can show up as culture sometimes, masked as culture, and amongst a particular group of people. Maybe it's children of the 90s, children of the 80s, or maybe it's first cousins within a particular group. Whereas like intergenerational trauma is the way that a set of experiences, stories, patterns, behaviors, ways of being, illness can be passed down generation to generation. And often it shows up in our bodies as well. I love telling the story of, this always makes it click. For example, a female baby in utero at around 5 or 6 months carries the eggs, all the eggs that they will have in their lifetime. So this means that we share a body. When I was in my mother's, when my mother was in her mother's womb, so when my mother was in her grandmother's womb, she carried the egg of what would become me. So in sharing that body, everything that my grandmother was experiencing, my mother felt. And as a result of being an egg and yet to be, that I also experienced those things. So those can show up in mental health, physical health, that can show up in the ways like across our cultures as regular things we see, predispositions and vulnerabilities in physical health issues, diabetes. I talk about a lot the connection between enslavement and now like contemporary versions of enslavement.
That's intergenerational trauma. They taking on the narrative that, the grandma has to fix everything. So then as a woman watching her grandmom and her mom, it's like, well, I got to be the one that handles all the messes, that fixes everything. So you have a generation of older sisters who are just like, I got to show up. I have to show up this way, without really taking time to understand who they are outside of help, who they are outside of a person that is supposed to be the fixer, the person that's supposed to put things in order. And then we talk about the things that we may joke about that aren't really funny, like, oh, you can't go over and sit on Uncle James' lap, that kind of stuff. And the idea that we protect those that hurt us in order to save face, where that come from, a lot of people not wanting their families to be fractured or harmed or policed or lynched due to this predator or this person becoming not just a negative impact on my family, my community, but we talk about the oppressor at large, and then you have that predatory story. So we've learned to keep things hush hush and try to handle them ourselves, but we're not handling them. We're instead teaching people that when bad things happen to you, you just keep it quiet, and when the time is right, then we'll get to it. But when is that
right?
When is the time right? Yeah.
I think to piggyback off of that, Dr. Vivid, is this idea that both anti-Black racism and sexual violence are both tools of colonization and oppression, right? And so it's not an accident that we have these experiences, and they're so interconnected. It is intentional. Whenever you think of places that have been colonized, they kill the men, they rape the women. Like that's how they've spread their power. And so it's not an accident that we find ourselves in these spaces of having to acknowledge both healing from a world that's been taught to hate us as Black people and as women. And that work is it's complex and it's very integrated and interconnected, and it's hard. Like, and I think knowing that going into the work of like healing is hard work, and when you have to heal from both your experiences of being Black and experiencing sexual violence, it's a journey, and it's a hard journey, and you have to be committed to that journey to get through, but not like sugarcoating how hard the work will be, because we live in this intersection of it.
There were things that, saved us, like with the street lights, or even I think a lot about how growing up, if we go back to slavery, oftentimes in Black communities, our parents or our family members, they will belittle us and talk poorly about us. He ain't nothing, he's worthless, all of these negative things that are said, which served us well during slavery, so that our children weren't sold off or put on the auction block. So we want to say, no, he's weak, he's shiftless, you don't want him, you don't want that one. But we're not necessarily on an auction block today, and we're still saying these things within our community. And also on a positive light, when we look at what was cultivated in the womb, I think we also need to talk about the positive things that were passed down within our community. Because we talk about the fibroids, we talk about the depression, the anxiety, the alcoholism, but also the resilience, the strength, the stories, those things, yes, the creativity, all of those things that are passed down, and really looking at the science of it, which is also really important, because when people started to study this and look at it, they looked at the children, the offspring of Holocaust survivors. They didn't sit down and they didn't look at those who were passed down from American chattel slavery and look at what happened within our community. So now we're taking the research and the science from the Holocaust survivors, and we can say we can apply this to our community too, knowing the amount of trauma that we've experienced in our lives and how that's been passed down.